At the beginning of Act 3, Iago has so far advanced his plans that Cassio is already unknowingly set up to act a part that will allow Iago to misrepresent his actions to Othello. As Cassio, on the urgings of Iago, seeks to plead his case for reinstatement of his position to Desdemona, Iago plots to insinuate that his visits are evidence of an adulterous affair. Othello, who begins the act in a state of enraptured love, will end it after Iago has poisoned his thoughts in a desperate rage of anger and suspicion against Desdemona and Cassio. And while Iago works to ruin all their lives, Shakespeare intensifies the dramatic irony by their frequent praise of his good qualities. Cassio says of Iago that he never knew a Florentine more kind and honest. Desdemona calls him an honest fellow, and Othello declares to him, "I know thou'rt full of love and honesty." Yet, while Iago is able to blind them with his show of benevolent concern, the person who knows him best, his wife Emilia, makes a more accurate assessment of his character, calling him "my wayward husband." However, even she seems to be taken in by Iago's show of concern for Cassio's predicament, saying to Desdemona, "I warrant it grieves my husband as if the case were his." The constant refrain of the perception of Iago's honesty and good intentions suggests the vulnerability of humans to being deceived, especially by those with a serpent-like ability to mix truth and lies in such a way as to misrepresent the motives of others, while subtly suggesting the idea of their own compassionate care. Iago is a master of suggestion, hinting that things are amiss, while adopting an attitude of reluctance to disclose what he seems to know. Before he starts to worm his way like a canker into Othello's mind, Othello is deeply and happily in love with his wife, calling her "sweet Desdemon," and saying in response to her suit on Cassio's behalf, "I will deny thee nothing." As she exits after having secured a promise from Othello to speak to Cassio about reinstating him to his position, he looks after her and declares, "Excellent wretch, perdition catch my soul, but I do love thee, and when I love thee not, chaos is come again." In talking of his soul, he reveals that his love for his wife reverberates at the deepest level of his being, while at the same time the language of wretch and perdition suggests a sense of bewitchment, as though the fate of his soul is now in her hands. He declares that the entire order of his life revolves around his love for her, and should that ever be disturbed, he would be plunged into chaos, another word for hell. The fact that his mind is straying to this thought is evidence that he has already been faintly unsettled by Iago's first drop of poison. For as they saw Cassio leave from his audience with Desdemona just as they arrived, Iago makes the cryptic comment, "Ha, I like not that." When questioned by Othello as to his meaning, he remains mysterious, just hinting at some vague worry. "Nothing, my lord, or if I know not what." As Othello, in an attempt to clarify the focus of his concern, asks if that was not Cassio taking leave of his wife, Iago deftly frames the circumstance in a deeply deceptive way, painting the innocent action as something suspicious and underhand, while simultaneously giving the impression that he is attempting to defend Cassio's reputation. Cassio, my lord? No, sure, I cannot think it, that he would steal away so guilty-like, seeing you coming. It is this confusion of the moral realities that Iago excels at, undermining Othello's perception of the world and his beliefs, eventually shaking even the foundations of his sanity. This is the perennial project of evil, to upset the patterning of truth and beauty in the world that leads to human flourishing, and to present a dark inversion of morality, as those who call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Iago knows this cannot be achieved openly. He must use cunning, first to introduce doubt and anxiety into Othello's mind, to disrupt his confidence and trust. He does this by performing a kind of devilish dance with his language, first putting forward an idea, and then stepping back and repeating the process, so that he is able to trouble Othello while maintaining the pretense that he does not wish to worry him. Thus, he questions Othello about Cassio's involvement in his wooing of Desdemona, and when Othello naturally asks why, he echoes his questions instead of giving straightforward answers, giving the impression he is hiding something and provoking Othello to a point of vexation. Is he not honest? Honest, my lord? Honest, aye, honest. My lord, for aught I know. What dost thou think? Think, my lord? Think, my lord. By heaven, he echoes me, as if there were some monster in his thought too hideous to be shown. This is indeed Iago's intention, to introduce the idea of some vague, sinister threat lurking in the shadows. But it is also, at another level, disturbingly true. There is indeed a hideous monster concealed in Iago's mind. Not the phantom he conjures up to torture Othello with, but the monster of his own envy and hatred. Once Othello is sufficiently perturbed, Iago is able to lead him further into dark thoughts with a toxic mixture of innuendo and truths disingenuously applied, culminating in an apparently heartfelt warning to guard against the vice of jealousy, thus insinuating he may have cause to feel it. With staggering hypocrisy, Iago declares that men should be what they seem, and when Othello agrees with him, states, "Why then, I think Cassio's an honest man." This cleverly qualified endorsement casts a shadow on Cassio's character that inevitably prompts Othello to urge Iago to tell him what he truly thinks. In response, Iago feigns reluctance to reveal his thoughts, claiming that Othello should pay no attention to them, for, he says, "I confess it is my nature's plague to spy into abuses, and oft my jealousy shapes faults that are not." Thus, by presenting an accurate description of his own malicious habits, in the guise of a candid attempt to shield Othello from his too zealous suspicions, he so mixes truth and falsehood that Othello is left bewildered and anxious and vulnerable to a more direct assault upon his feelings, as Iago exclaims, "Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy! It is the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on." When Othello protests his scorn for those who would live with jealous suspicions, but claims he would either live in trust or, if shown evidence of betrayal, swiftly mete out judgment, Iago uses this as an excuse to then help Othello to seek for evidence, one way or another, of Desdemona's adultery, casually poisoning his mind further with scurrilous generalizations. "I know our country disposition well. In Venice they do let God see the pranks they dare not show their husbands." At the same time, he performs a slick and cunning distortion of the truth, in such a way as to cast the shade of his own deliberate exploitation of Othello's good nature onto others, while posing as his defender. "I would not have your free and noble nature out of self-bounty be abused." Thus he shifts the suspicion which Othello should rightly have of him onto the innocent parties of Desdemona and Cassio, so that he is able to administer another drop of poison in his reminder that Desdemona deceived her own father in marrying him, while professing to be acting out of an excess of loyal affection. "I humbly do beseech you of your pardon for too much loving you." Othello, apparently convinced of his trustworthiness, declares, "I am bound to thee forever." And he is indeed bound to him, as to a wheel of fire which will destroy him. Iago, seeing how he has perturbed Othello, seems to take malicious pleasure in repeatedly pointing out his distress while pretending concern. "I see this hath a little dashed your spirits. I do see you're moved. My lord, I see you're moved." Othello's response, "No, not much moved. I do not think but Desdemona's honest," makes for a feeble comparison with his declaration in the first act, "My life upon her faith," and conveys the sad disintegration of his trust as he allows Iago to pollute his mind with deceitful fantasies. When Iago leaves him, his soliloquy lurches from affirmation of Iago's wisdom to angry pride, to sadness, and finally to a passionate avowal of Desdemona's purity. His thoughts are in turmoil, as all the certainties of his world have been turned upside down by Iago's insinuations, and in his confusion he clings ironically to the author of his chaos, Iago. "This fellow's of exceeding honesty, and knows all qualities with a learned spirit of human dealings." Othello's moral anchor having been wrenched up by Iago, he desperately grasps at some shreds of goodness, and thinks he finds them in Iago's apparent concerns for his well-being. Nor is he entirely wrong in what he says of him. Iago is indeed learned in human dealings, and knows well how to manipulate human weakness. Iago has already needled Othello by speaking of the unnatural desire of a white Venetian woman to marry a Moor, and where previously he was absolutely confident of her love, he is now beset by anxious doubts. Haply, for I am black, and have not those soft parts of conversation that chamberers have. Iago has exposed his vulnerabilities, but he has also touched his pride, so that in the next moment he angrily declares, I had rather be a toad and live upon the vapour of a dungeon than keep a corner in the thing I love for others' uses. Ironically, it is Iago who has placed him in the vapour of a dungeon, trapping him in the fetid atmosphere of lies, and momentarily free of his influence and setting eyes once more on Desdemona as she enters with Emilia. His moral compass snaps back into its proper place, and he sees the truth. If she be false, oh, then heaven mocks itself. I'll not believe it. But the agony of doubt remains. He later lashes out at Iago, calling him villain, and he uses an image of torture to express the pain that Iago has inflicted on him. Thou hast set me on the rack. He declares he would rather not have known her supposed betrayal, because he was happy in his ignorance, and in a powerful declaration of despair he reveals the true extent of the damage that Iago has done to him. Oh, now forever, farewell the tranquil mind, farewell content, farewell the plumed troops and the big wars that makes ambition virtue. Farewell, Othello's occupations gone. Shakespeare strikingly exposes in this speech how Iago has not only lied about Desdemona, but has carried out an assault on truth itself. He has not only undermined Othello's trust in the goodness and honesty of his wife, but he has shattered his belief in virtue itself. For if he can be wrong about someone in whom he had absolute faith, then what else is secure? The honour and nobility of his proud warrior creed fall too. And the magnitude of this fall is evoked by his imagery of the stirring clamour and power of battle. The neighing steed and the shrill trump, the royal banner and all quality, pride, pomp and circumstance of glorious war, in which one can almost hear the clatter of helmets falling to the ground. Iago knows the power of a couple of burrowing beetles to spread rot through weakened timbers until they crumble into dust. Thus, having got Emilia to procure him a special handkerchief of Desdemona's that was gifted to her by Othello, he plots to use it to inflame Othello's jealousy even further. Trifles light as air are to the jealous confirmations strong as proofs of Holy Writ. He has already distorted Othello's vision, so that he sees not with the measured calm that he used to possess, but with a distorted eye of fevered jealousy, so that trifles light as air can be made, as Iago says, to burn like the mines of sulphur. Again, Shakespeare associates Iago with hellish imagery, in contrast to the heavenly imagery repeatedly used of Desdemona, which deepens the tragic sense of Othello's struggle as he is pulled towards the temptations of evil. As Iago works on him further with fabricated tales of Cassio wiping his beard with Desdemona's handkerchief, and crying out passionately to Desdemona in his dreams, Othello becomes less and less rational, until he is engulfed in violent fury, saying of Desdemona, "I'll tear her all to pieces," and of Cassio, Oh, that the slave had 40,000 lives! One is too poor, too weak for my revenge. Giving way entirely to the darkness of anger and detestation, he declares, Arise, black vengeance, from thy hollow cell. Yield up, O love, thy crown and hearted throne to tyrannous hate. This is Iago's success, that he has led Othello into choosing evil over good. And the language he uses here evokes the bitter fruits of that choice. The idea of vengeance's hollow cell that can never be filled, but aches constantly for more and more vicious punishment. And the enslavement to the sinfulness of hatred implied in the phrase tyrannous hate. The blind rage that overwhelms Othello is frighteningly conveyed in his response to Iago's disingenuous urging to be content after provoking him to this point. Oh, blood, blood, blood! The unthinking repetition of the word conveys his mood of wild and murderous intent that has quite overwhelmed his judgment. This is the result of his switch of allegiance, and Shakespeare conveys the spiritual nature of this change in him, not only by the language used, but by his staging, as he has Othello kneel once he has abandoned the hearted throne of the god of love and committed himself to tyrannous hate. This is an act of worship to the power of evil, and the heaven he now bows down to is cold, hard, and unyielding. Now by yond marble heaven, in the due reverence of a sacred vow, I here engage my words. And Iago, having converted him to his own creed, kneels with him, and calls on the pagan gods of the stars and elements to witness his pledge to what bloody business ever. The bloody business is the murder of Cassio, promised by Iago, and the murder of Desdemona by Othello, who vows to kill the fair devil. At the end of this unholy undertaking, Othello appoints Iago as his lieutenant, and Iago responds, I am your own forever. This could be a simple mark of gratitude for the post he had long been angling for. However, the language has an oddly romantic tone, which may imply that the bond of love that Othello previously had with Desdemona has now been replaced by a bond of hatred with Iago. In the final scene of the act, Desdemona is seen worrying over the loss of the handkerchief given to her by Othello, but shows a touching confidence in him. But my noble Moor is true of mind and made of no such baseness as jealous creatures are. It were enough to put him to ill thinking. This is a poignant reminder to the audience of Othello's natural character, and serves to make the contrast with his foul raging of the previous scene more horrible and shocking. When Othello arrives, he pretends to have a cold and asks for the handkerchief he gave her. When she says she does not have it on her, he upbraids her, declaring it was imbued with magic, so that to lose it or give it away would mean perdition. Frightened by his manner, she dissembles and says it is not lost, and Othello demands that she fetch it. To deflect him from this, she continues to press Cassio's suit, as he 3 times curtly demands, "The handkerchief," so that they are speaking entirely at cross purposes, exposing the gulf that has now opened up between them. Later, when Othello has gone and Cassio is once again urging his suit to Desdemona, she now seems doubtful of her ability to move him, saying, "My lord is not my lord, nor should I know him were he in favour as in humour altered." There is an eerie echoing in this phrase of Iago's statement in Act 1, that I am not what I am, as though Iago has succeeded in creating a diabolical image of himself in Othello. But while Iago's facade of honour and honesty hides a demonic core of malevolence, Othello's new face of vengeful fury hides his true core of nobility. Iago has turned him inside out and created chaos that has wreaked havoc on his calm and trusting nature, so that he can no longer distinguish truth from lies. In contrast to the poisonous brew of hatred that Iago has fed to Othello, Desdemona displays a gentle, forgiving spirit towards Othello, reminding herself that we must think men are not gods. In other words, we should be understanding towards each other, knowing that we are all fallible human beings. Instead of blaming him, she rebukes herself for too harshly judging him. I was, unhandsome warrior as I am, arraigning his unkindness with my soul, but now I find I had suborned the witness, and he's indicted falsely. Emilia, less graciously but more realistically, voices her concern that he may be jealous, and when Desdemona declares, "I never gave him cause," she displays a common-sense wisdom that ironically describes her own husband. But jealous souls will not be answered so. They are not ever jealous for the cause, but jealous for their jealous. 'Tis a monster begot upon itself, born on itself. This sense that jealousy is a creature of the depths echoes Iago's own language in his description of the green-eyed monster, and stands in marked contrast to Desdemona's measured legal language of arraigning, suborned, and indicted, as she carefully considers the evidence before condemning Othello. The act ends with a short interaction between Cassio and Bianca, a courtesan with whom Cassio is carrying on a dalliance, as he passes her Desdemona's handkerchief that had deliberately been left in his chamber by Iago, and, not knowing to whom it belongs, asks her to have the design copied before it is sought by its owner. The audience, having just witnessed the explosive wrath of Othello, whose jealousy is now focused on this object due to Iago's manoeuvrings, is now left with an ominous sense of the catastrophe that will inevitably unfold from the trap that he has set.